Glad you're here. Hey, friends, we're working our butts off to bring you this content just for your entertainment. If you like what you see, here's the deal. Instead of offering us tea, just hit that subscribe button. It's way easier, totally free, and honestly makes us just as happy. Let's start the news story for my dearly viewers. I remember the first time I understood in a way that landed in my body and not just my thoughts that my life was going to be shaped by something I didn't have language for yet. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. It didn't arrive with a soundtrack or a speech. It showed up in the plain light of an ordinary afternoon in a quiet space between a mother and a child where a small choice can echo for years. I was around 8, maybe 9. Old enough to recognize rules, but young enough to think rules were mostly just gravity. There because they were there, not because somebody decided them. Our house wasn't big, but it was orderly. My mom kept things neat in a way that didn't feel obsessive, just intentional. Shoes lined up. Laundry folded on the same day each week. Even the air felt organized. My dad worked long hours and came home tired. The kind of tired that makes a person's voice shorter. Not mean exactly, just clipped around the edges. He loved us. I never doubted that. But he was from a world where feelings were treated like private paperwork. My mom was the one who asked questions and waited for answers. That day started with a problem, a simple one. My class had a school picture coming up and my mom had been trying to get me to care about what I wore. I didn't. I cared about whether I could finish my comic book before dinner, whether my sneakers were fast, whether my friends would pick me for kickball. Clothing to me was a shell you put on to go outside. It wasn't identity. It wasn't expression. It wasn't a statement. It just existed. My mom, though, had noticed something I hadn't admitted to myself. She had noticed that when we passed the women's department at the mall, my eyes didn't glide over it the way my friends' eyes did. Mine lingered just a beat too long, like the fabric had a magnetic field. She'd noticed that when she watched television and a dress swirled on the screen, I watched the movement, not the character. She'd noticed, too, how quickly I corrected my face afterward, as if someone might accuse me of something just for looking. I didn't know she'd noticed. I thought I was hiding it. That's the thing about kids. We think secrecy is mostly about what we don't say, not what we can't stop being. I was in my room on the floor, half-dressed in the way children are half-dressed when they're not trying to make a point. My mom opened the door without knocking, which she usually did, and paused like she was measuring the moment. "Can you come help me for a second?" she asked. I followed her to her bedroom. That room had always felt slightly off-limits. Not because it was forbidden, but because it was adult. It smelled like her perfume and laundry detergent and something else that I now understand as time, the way grown-up spaces carry the weight of habits. She went to her closet and slid open the door. The hangers made that soft clacking sound, the sound of choices being moved aside. "I'm cleaning," she said, which was a reasonable lie because she was always cleaning something. "And I found something I don't wear anymore. I thought maybe you could try it on for me just to see if it still looks okay." Even then, my stomach tightened. Not because I didn't want to, because I did, but wanting it felt like stepping onto thin ice. Wanting it felt like evidence. She pulled out a simple skirt first. Not a bright one, not a costume look one, just a dark, soft fabric that didn't scream for attention. Then a blouse, pale and plain. The kind of thing a person could wear to work. She laid them on the bed like she was setting out school clothes. Normal, casual, almost boring. I stared at them too long. My mom didn't rush me. She sat at the edge of the bed and patted the blanket beside her. "You don't have to," she said. "I just thought, you've been curious." My cheeks burned instantly. I felt embarrassed in a way that was more complicated than shame, but close enough to confuse the two. My first instinct was denial. Not because I believed it, but because denial was the safest shape for my mouth. "I'm not curious," I said. "Too fast." She looked at me with a kind of gentle steadiness. "Okay," she replied as if my answer could be true and she'd still be fine. "Then it can just be a silly thing like playing dress up. But I want you to know something. Clothes are just clothes. They don't make you good or bad. They don't decide who you are. They're fabric. That's all. It's strange what sticks with you. Not the skirt itself, not the blouse, but that sentence. Clothes are just clothes. In her voice, it sounded like permission. Not permission to become something else, but permission to explore without being sentenced by it. I whispered, Dad will be mad. My mom's face shifted, not into anger, but into something like recognition. Dad doesn't need to know right now, she said. This is between you and me. And I promise you, I'm not trying to trick you into anything. I just don't want you to feel like you have to carry questions alone. I remember standing there, my hands clenched at my sides, my heart pounding like I'd done something wrong even before doing anything. The tension wasn't about the clothing. It was about the idea that if I crossed an invisible line, I wouldn't be able to cross back. Kids think identity is like a door that locks behind you. One step and you're trapped. My mom stood up and handed me the skirt with both hands, like she was handing me something fragile. I took it the same way. I walked into her bathroom and closed the door. The lock clicked and that tiny sound made everything feel more real. There's no way to describe that first moment without making it sound bigger than it was. It wasn't a magical transformation. It wasn't me looking in the mirror and suddenly understanding the universe. It was awkward. The skirt was too big at the waist. The blouse gaped a little at the shoulders. My hands shook as I tried to figure out how the buttons worked. I felt clumsy and hyper-aware of my own breathing. But underneath the awkwardness, something else happened. A quiet easing. Like a muscle I've been holding tight without realizing it finally let go. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a different person. I saw myself, but arranged in a new way. And the most surprising part wasn't excitement. It was relief. Not the relief of achieving something, but the relief of allowing something to be true in a safe place. I opened the bathroom door and stepped out. My mom didn't gasp. She didn't laugh. She didn't clap. She didn't do any of the things I'd secretly feared or fantasized about. She just looked at me the way she looked at my drawings when I was little. Serious, attentive, like it mattered because I mattered. Are you okay? She asked. I nodded, then shook my head, then nodded again. I don't know. That's an honest answer, she said. She stood and adjusted the waistband gently. Practical as always. It's too loose. That's why it feels weird. I swallowed. Do I look stupid? My mom met my eyes in the mirror. You look like a kid trying something new, she said. And you look nervous, but you don't look stupid. I stared at my reflection. I was waiting for the punchline that never came. Without a punchline, the moment became something else. Not a joke, not a secret crime, just a moment. We didn't talk about labels. She didn't say this means you or this. She didn't say this is just a phase either. She didn't trap me in either direction. She asked questions instead. How does it feel? She asked. I searched for words that weren't available to me. The closest I could get was quiet. My mom nodded slowly like she understood exactly what I meant. Sometimes she said quiet is what we need. The world is loud. It tells us what to be. It tells us what boys do and what girls do. But inside, we're all more complicated than that. And it's okay to learn your own shape. That sentence too stayed with me even when I pretended it didn't. After that day, the clothes went back into the closet. There was no big we'll do this again of plan. But something had shifted between us. A small bridge built out of trust. I knew I could tell her something unusual and she wouldn't panic. For a while, that was enough. Then I got older and the world got sharper. In middle school, rules stopped being invisible and became enforced. Boys learned quickly that the wrong gesture could get you labeled. The wrong interest could make you a target. I didn't even have to do anything obvious. Kids could smell difference the way dogs smell fear. I started monitoring myself without being aware I was doing it, how I walked, how I held my hands, how long my eyes stayed on anything that might be interpreted the wrong way. My mom never pushed. Sometimes she'd ask quietly, "Do you want to talk?" And I'd say no. Not because I didn't trust her. Because the moment I spoke, I worried she'd look at me differently, even if she tried not to. I worried that even kindness would become a spotlight. So, I started splitting myself. There was the version of me at school, assembled out of safety, neutral clothes, neutral hobbies, jokes that didn't reveal too much. And there was the version of me in my head, the one that kept returning to that mirror, to the sense of quiet. I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. I told myself I just liked the softness of fabric. I told myself I was just curious. I told myself it was a strange hobby, like collecting rocks. But the truth didn't care what story I used. The truth kept showing up in small ways. The calm I felt when I imagined myself in certain clothes. The way I envied how freely girls could express emotion without being punished for it. The way I wished I could borrow their permission to be gentle. I didn't hate being a boy. That's important. I didn't wake up feeling like I was in the wrong body. At least not in any simple constant way. I just felt like the role of a boy came with a script that was too narrow for me. And because I didn't have words, I thought the only choices were to obey the script or to be broken. The first consequence came, like consequences often do, through a mistake. One afternoon, my parents were out. I was home alone, supposed to be doing homework. My mom's closet was down the hall, and the pull toward it felt like thirst. I told myself I would just look, that I would just touch the fabric, that I would put it back, and no one would know. I made a promise to myself that I'd do it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. I pulled out the blouse and skirt from years earlier. They were still there, folded neatly, like a preserved memory. I changed in a rush, and in the rushing, I forgot to lock the front door. Or maybe I locked it and didn't pull it fully. The details blur because the important part is what happened next. My dad came home early. I heard the door open. I froze so completely I felt like my bones had turned to ice. My dad's footsteps were heavy, familiar, and suddenly terrifying. I stood in the hallway in clothes that felt both comforting and dangerously wrong, and my mind did the frantic math of escape routes. I sprinted into my room and slammed the door, yanking off the skirt so fast I nearly fell. I shoved everything under my bed, pulled on jeans, tried to slow my breathing. My dad knocked once and opened the door without waiting, the way fathers sometimes do when they believe privacy is a privilege, not a right. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Homework." I lied, my voice too high. His eyes scanned the room. I could see suspicion rise like a tide. He frowned. "Why are you sweating?" "I was exercising," I said, and I hated myself for how obvious it sounded. He grunted, not convinced, but too tired to interrogate further. He left, but the fear didn't leave with him. The fear stayed in my body for hours, for days. It stayed as a lesson. If this part of me got seen, it could cost me safety. That night, my mom found me sitting at the kitchen table, not eating. She asked what happened, and I shook my head. She didn't push. She just sat with me, her presence quiet and steady. Later, when my dad was asleep, she came to my room and closed the door carefully. "I think you got scared today," she said. I stared at the wall. My throat felt locked. When I didn't answer, she continued softly. "You don't have to tell me details, but I want you to know I'm still here. And I want you to understand something else, too. Secrets can keep you safe, but they can also make you lonely. We have to find a way for you to be safe and not alone." I finally whispered, "What if he finds out?" My mom exhaled slowly. "Then we handle it," she said. "But we handle it responsibly. That means we don't put you in danger. It also means we don't lie to ourselves about what you need. We take it step by step. Step by step." She kept saying that phrase over the years. It became a kind of railing I could hold on to when my mind wanted to jump to disaster. High school brought new pressures. I learned how quickly rumors could become reality in other people's minds. I saw boys get punished for being too soft, too artistic, too different. I also saw girls get punished for being too loud, too confident, too much. It wasn't just a boy rule of problem. It was a rule problem, a social norm problem, a human fear problem. People fear what they can't categorize. I tried for a while to solve my feelings by burying them under achievement. I became good at school. Teachers praised me. Adults said I was mature. I discovered that being the smart kid was a disguise no one questioned. It gave me a role that explained my quietness, my distance. If I was reading instead of flirting, it wasn't because I felt awkward in masculinity. It was because I was focused. People love explanations that don't require them to rethink anything. But at night alone, I'd sometimes pull out a piece of clothing my mom had quietly left in my dresser drawer. Not her clothing exactly, something simpler. A soft sweater, a pair of neutral leggings, items that weren't meant to be provocative, just comfortable. She never mentioned it directly. She didn't say, "I put these here." She just made it possible. When I wore them, I felt like I could breathe. I also felt guilty because I'd been taught that relief was suspicious, that if something felt good, it must be wrong. I spent years trying to answer the question, what does this mean, as if meaning was a single stamp I could press onto myself. I read articles online, careful to clear the browser history like it was contraband. I found words like gender expression, gender identity, and crowd dressing. I found stories that resembled mine and stories that didn't. Some people described crossdressing as performance, some as comfort, some as identity, some as art. I learned slowly that there wasn't one correct reason, and that not knowing immediately wasn't a failure. Still, fear kept me from integrating any of it into my public life. I didn't tell friends. I didn't date much. I built walls and called them boundaries. I became good at being admired from a distance, which is not the same as being known. The first time I tried to tell someone besides my mom, I chose the wrong person. Not wrong in the sense of evil, but wrong in readiness. It was a friend I trusted for being funny, not for being wise. I thought humor meant safety. We were sitting in his basement playing games, the kind of late-night hangout where boys confess things because it's dark and the world feels far away. My heart hammered. I said as lightly as I could. Sometimes I like wearing different clothes. He paused. Like what? I shrugged, trying to make it sound casual, like feminine clothes. He stared at me, and for a second, his face was blank. Then he laughed. Not cruel laughter, but startled laughter, the kind that happens when someone doesn't know what to do. "You're messing with me." "I'm not," I said. And the words came out small. He stopped laughing, but his expression shifted into discomfort. "Dude," he said, lowering his voice like the word itself was dangerous. "Why would you do that?" I tried to explain and I couldn't. My reasons were made of feelings and history and soft things that didn't translate well into basement air. All I could say was, "It just helps." He didn't call me names. He didn't punch me. But he pulled away in a way that was almost worse because it wasn't dramatic enough to justify anger. It was just distancing. He changed the topic. He avoided eye contact. He left early the next day. And within a week, I noticed he wasn't texting me like before. That was a consequence. Not a catastrophe, but a loss. It taught me that trust isn't just about liking someone. It's about their capacity to hold complexity without dropping it. I didn't tell anyone else for a long time. College gave me a different kind of freedom and anonymity. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people who didn't know my childhood, my family, my past self. I could reinvent at least slightly. I joined clubs. I made friends. I watched how some people moved through the world with less fear than I'd ever allowed myself. I met people who were openly queer, openly gender non-conforming, openly thoughtful about identity. I didn't become them, but I learned from their courage that the world didn't always end when you were honest. Still, my own honesty felt stuck. I didn't know where I fit. I wasn't sure if I was transgender or non-binary or just someone who liked crossdressing. I was terrified of claiming a label that wasn't mine and terrified of refusing a label that might be mine. The uncertainty itself became a kind of cage. My mom and I talked more during those years, not constantly, but in deeper ways. She never demanded a conclusion from me. She asked how I was sleeping, whether I felt anxious, whether I had someone to talk to. She talked about mental health with a blunt kindness. Your mind is part of your body. She told me, if you ignore it, it will still speak, usually louder. I started seeing a counselor on campus, not because something was wrong with me, but because I was tired of carrying everything alone. The counselor didn't try to define me. She helped me notice patterns. How I used perfectionism to avoid vulnerability. How I treated my own comfort like a threat. How shame disguised itself as responsibility. One session, she said something that sounded obvious but changed me. Exploration isn't a promise. It's a practice. Exploration isn't a promise. That meant I could try things without declaring a lifetime contract. I could learn without making a spectacle of myself. I could take steps that were reversible, safe, grounded. So, I began quietly with small acts of integration. I stopped thinking of crossdressing as a secret life and started thinking of it as a form of self-care. Not in the shallow sense, but in the responsible sense, caring for the whole self, including the parts that don't fit neatly into social expectations. I chose clothing that felt like me, not like a costume. Soft sweaters, simple jeans that happened to be from the women's section because they fit my body differently. Neutral colors, nothing that would make someone stare, not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted the experience to be about my internal reality, not about other people's reactions. The first time I left my dorm wearing something slightly feminine, my chest felt tight. I expected people to point, to laugh, to expose me. Most people didn't notice. Some did and didn't care. A few glanced longer than usual, but the world didn't crack open. The consequence was internal. I realized that my fear had been narrating my life more than facts had. That didn't mean it was easy. The fear didn't vanish because I had one successful day. Fear is stubborn. It takes repetition to retrain. Over time, I began to understand that identity isn't only about what you are. It's also about how you treat yourself while you're figuring it out. The ethical choices were quieter than people imagine. Not should I reveal everything dramatically, but should I be honest with this friend? Should I take care of my mental health? Should I respect my family's limitations without letting them define my worth? Should I avoid using someone else's identity as a shield for my confusion? These were moral decisions because they involved responsibility to myself, to others, to truth. After college, adulthood arrived with its own set of pressures. Jobs are social environments with different consequences than school. You can't just switch classrooms if someone decides you're strange. Rent doesn't care about your self-discovery. I became more cautious again, not because I regressed, but because I had to weigh risk differently. And then inevitably, the question of my dad came back. It had been hovering for years like weather. My dad and I had a relationship that was cordial, even warm at times, but always limited. He praised hard work. He appreciated reliability. He didn't talk much about feelings. If I tried, he looked like someone had turned on a bright light in his face. I used to interpret that as lack of love. Later, I understood it as lack of tools. One weekend, I visited home. My mom was making tea. My dad was watching television, half asleep in his chair. The old house felt smaller than I remembered, like it had stayed the same while I'd expanded. I went into my childhood room and saw the familiar dresser. I opened a drawer and found, folded neatly, the same soft clothing my mom had once left there, now stored like a reminder that I hadn't imagined my own history. My throat tightened. I realized I'd been living in a long pause, always waiting for some final reckoning before I could fully relax. That night, after dinner, my mom asked my dad if he could help her with something in the bedroom. She didn't look at me when she did it, but I felt the deliberate calm in her voice. I knew then before anything happened that she was choosing a moment. They were gone longer than usual. My hands sweated. My brain tried to predict every possible outcome from shouting to silence to rejection. I considered leaving. I considered pretending I was tired and going to bed early. Instead, I sat on the couch and listened to the refrigerator hum to the distant sound of their voices muffled by walls. When they came back, my dad looked different. Not angry. Exactly. More like braced, like someone preparing to lift something heavy. He stood in the doorway of the living room and said my name. I looked up. He cleared his throat. Your mom tells me you've been dealing with some things. I hated the vagueness, but I understood why he used it. It was his way of approaching without stepping directly into the fire. I nodded. My mouth was dry. He sat down heavily on the chair across from me. The television was still on but muted now, flickering meaningless light. I don't understand it, he said, blunt as always. But I want to understand you, and I don't want you thinking you have to hide in your own house. The words hit me like a wave. Not because they were perfect, but because they were effort. My dad wasn't suddenly eloquent. He wasn't suddenly a different person. He was doing something that cost him pride, admitting he didn't know. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to disappoint you, I said, and the sentence surprised me with its simplicity. Beneath all the identity questions, that fear had always been there. My dad's jaw tightened. He looked away, then back. I don't want you to be ashamed, he said. I don't want you to get hurt. The world can be cruel. That's what I know. I wanted to say I already got hurt and sometimes it was because I was hiding. I wanted to say your fear became mine. But I also saw that this was the edge of his capacity and if I pushed too hard, he might retreat. So I tried something different. I chose responsibility over revenge. I said, I'm learning how to be careful and honest at the same time. He nodded slowly, as if that was a language he could understand. That sounds unreasonable, he said, like reason was his anchor. We talked for a long time that night, not in dramatic confessions, but in uneven steps. He asked practical questions. Was I safe? Was I being bullied? Was I seeing anyone? Was I depressed? He didn't ask about details of clothing, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how. My mom sat nearby, quiet, like a translator who didn't need to speak because her presence itself translated love. It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were moments I felt him pulling back. There were moments he said something clumsy, something rooted in old assumptions, but he kept returning to one point. I'm trying. In the weeks after, I felt something I hadn't expected. Grief. Not grief for a tragedy, but grief for the years I'd spent alone with fear. Grief for the child in my mom's bathroom who thought he had to choose between comfort and safety. Grief for all the versions of myself I'd edited down to fit into other people's expectations. The grief came with anger sometimes, but it also came with clarity. I couldn't get those years back, but I could stop repeating them. That became the beginning of integration. The last phase that I didn't know I was working toward. Integration didn't mean I crowd-stressed openly all the time. It didn't mean I made my gender expression my personality. It meant I stopped treating that part of me as a separate shameful compartment. I started to see it as one thread in a larger fabric. I learned to talk about it with a few trusted friends chosen carefully. I learned to watch for the difference between curiosity and judgment. I learned to set boundaries with people who wanted to turn my experience into gossip or debate. I learned that empathy isn't agreeing with someone. It's recognizing their humanity even when you don't share their feelings. I practiced that empathy toward myself first because without it, I couldn't ask it from anyone else. I also learned something uncomfortable. Self-acceptance doesn't erase accountability. If I wanted people to respect me, I had to respect them, too. That meant being honest in relationships, not springing secrets on someone as a test. It meant not using my mom as a shield against conflict. It meant acknowledging my dad's effort without pretending his limitations didn't affect me. It meant taking care of my mental health, not expecting identity exploration to automatically heal everything. There were still consequences. Some people didn't understand and never would. Some family members made comments that stung. Some environments felt unsafe and I chose discretion not out of shame but out of self-protection. That distinction mattered. Shame says you are wrong. Protection says you deserve safety. Over time, I began to appreciate how my mom had handled that first moment. She didn't sensationalize it. She didn't treat it as a joke. She didn't try to turn me into a story she could tell. She gave me something rare, a private space where my confusion wasn't punished. She understood that identity isn't something you win. It's something you live with, learn from, and carry responsibly. Now, when I think about that child in the mirror, I don't feel embarrassed the way I used to. I feel tenderness. I feel respect. I see a kid trying to survive a world that loves categories more than it loves complexity. And I see a mother quietly choosing love over fear. If there's one educational truth I'd want people to take from my life, it's this. You don't have to understand someone's experience in order to treat it with dignity. And you don't have to solve your identity like a puzzle to deserve peace. You can move slowly. You can ask for help. You can make room for uncertainty. You can take responsibility for your choices while still being kind to yourself. I'm still learning. I think I always will be. But the difference now is that my learning doesn't feel like hiding. It feels like growing. Thank you for watching and spending this time with me. If this story helped you understand yourself or others a little better, feel